Shamira. Shamira's an older horse. She's probably 22 and she's had a very checkered floating history. She's a scrambler and she's had a few falls in the float many years ago, and I lost track of her for about 10 years and she's come back to me. She reliably goes on. She needs to either have the whole float or she needs to be in an anti-scramble float, which is what I have. So it's no problems getting her on, but her responses aren't as reliable as they could be, and so I wanted to show her in a video because it's probably quite representative of a lot of horses that either I come across or that you might come across yourself. So what I wanted to show you first, and I'll move her around, is some of the things we would do to prepare the horse for the float. So we're going to do our 10 basic responses. Now I have my safety gear on, helmet, gloves, boots, I've got my whip, I've got a rope halter on. You might find you don't need to use a rope halter, but I like to use it because it gives really clear signals. I'm going to stay out of the line of her front feet, and I'm going to make sure that I use lots of whip contact so she's not fearful of the whip. So if I ask her to come forward, I'm going to use a whip tap where my leg would go. When I ask her to stop or go backwards, I'm going to use a rein aid up towards her throat, and I really like to have 2 steps from a light aid, so I can get 1, 2, and release, and she stops. So that is controlling her legs. If I did not have that from a light aid, I could use my whip taps on her cannon, and I'm going to keep tapping until she steps back. 2 steps from the light aid, great, good. I can also teach these things and add in a voice command. So when she does that, I'm going to step that back. Back. Now she knows that as a voice command, but if she didn't know it, I could say back, tap, tap. So you need to have a physical cue before you add a voice cue. She's a bit cranky, she's a bit flies, and this is the first time she's had to do any work in a little while, which will make her an even better candidate. So now if I ask her to walk forward, I'm going to ask her to move before I move, and that includes forwards and backwards. So she may want to have a scratch here. No, good. So I'd like you to keep an eye on her body language, so her posture, what she does with her head and neck, what she does with her feet. She's crept forward, so I'm going to ask her to step back. So this is a great time to test our park. Okay, and you'll notice we're right next to the float. So I need my horse to be able to park anywhere, and particularly next to the float, especially if they have an association with the float. That is particularly negative. So I could move quite a way. I'm out of shot now. You can see this horse has some quite well established responses. Okay, I can walk alongside her, I can walk forward away from her, and she does not associate that with needing to move her feet. That's really important for the float, because when you're in the float and you're needing to walk out of the float down along the bay, you don't want your horse following you. So these things are really, really important to ensure that your horse is doing them independently if you're having to hold them. So I could also make sure I have a turn aid. So I'm going to ask her to turn her front legs. Whoops, a loss of balance there. There we go. And that was a little bit of annoying because she thought I was being a fly, so maybe I wasn't being as clear as I could have been. Can I turn the way? Good girl. And she's giving me a little bit of a forward aid as well as a side-stepping aid, so I'm going to step her back there until I can get that clearer. I'm going to ask her again. Good girl. Well done, that was better. So ideally, 3 repetitions. Good girl. And I'm still having to use a slight don't go forward aid. but that's okay. Back. And I'm going to put her back over here. And I always like to add the whip in at the end with contact, because I don't want the horse to learn to run away from the whip. I wanted to see that it's just a cue. Good girl. And that laying the whip on her with contact means relax. Okay. Now with her feet still and in park, she's allowed to turn her head. I really just don't want her to eat, and I don't want her to notice that when she goes to eat, I'm actually not going to pull her head up, because if I put pressure on that halter, which places pressure on the nose, there needs to be a consequence for her feet. So if I pull her head up, and sometimes that means put your head up and sometimes it means step back, that's confusing for the horse. So I've taught her a voice, what's an audible cue, a smooch. That means put your head up. So if she were, there she's crept forward. If she were to eat, and I did the smooch, and she doesn't know that, I would just give her a little tap, 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 tap on the back or the rump. Let me see if I can tempt her. But she may not do it because she knows she's not allowed to. So I'm also going to check to see whether I've got head control, and I have. And now I can say, can you bring it back up? I'm not going to put any pressure on her head when she's near the float, because that can be one of those things that triggers a horse to pull back or to throw the head up and hit it on the roof, and I see this quite a bit with horses. So I can only say that in my experience, that it's really important that you don't put any pressure on your horse's head when you're in the float. You can indicate, and a light indicating aid, but if the horse starts to resist, you're better off to use a different cue to ask the horse to go forward. So your forward leading cues need to be really good. Your stop, your step back, and your park cues need to be really good. You also need relaxation, of course. So now I'm going to go and put her in the float and see what we get. Now this horse is very good at going in, so she might go in and go all the way in. I want to have control of her legs, so I want to be able to dictate how many steps in and how many steps back. Let her have a smell. Ask her to go up. So there I had to actually stop her from going all the way in. A lot of horses will go all the way into the float and they'll hit the chest bar and then they'll bounce back out at 100 miles an hour. We actually don't want them to do this. We want to have control over their legs all the way. So I have installed a go aid on the top of her tail, which I've used. Now when I ask her to come back, I'm going to see if I can stop her part the way out, because I don't want her thinking every time she steps back it's all the way out. So I go back. And she stayed parked, even though I walked away. So now I'm going to ask her to come back. Back. Straighten her head. So she's not quite to the point where she will stop and start at any point. She's getting there, but this is closer to what you're going to have. She starts to go back. And I'm not going to let her turn away and walk away from the float. She's just having a look at her friends and she's probably and see whether I can get park. And I'm actually going to clean that poo because I don't want her to slip. So for her that was pretty good. We've still got some work to do, and I'm going to show you in a minute about what you can do to train park while you're in the float. Back. Back. try and step her off backwards. And if she tries to turn, because she will turn often, and where their head and their eyes go can be where the horse goes. I had a small pony who only had to look one direction, and then she would put her head down and run off, and she was too strong to hold. Sorry. So I could also use whatever high value food rewards you use when you're training. So for her it would be apple or carrot chopped up. I'd make sure that I chop it up small so that you're not feeding a bucket loads of the stuff. Now I'm going to put it back on, and we're going to do those exercises that I would suggest you do before you actually shut the back of the float. So I'm going to get it to straighten up a little bit. I'm going to ask her to go in. Gentle feel on that lead rein aim. Now I have established a whip tap on the tail as a go forward button, because the whip tap on the belly where your leg goes isn't accessible once she's in the float, and that's the reason we train more than one go forward up. I just made sure that I don't use that top of the tail aid for anything else. So I have a bum bar, and I know different people have different versions of how their floats close, but this is how mine closes. So I'm going to swing that back and forth. Now a horse that's really anxious might hear that noise and then decide they need to go out backwards. But until you can swing that back and forth and the horse can stay still and calm, and she's just moved a little bit, so I'm going to get her to remove her feet from where they were. Until you can do that nice and calmly and your horse doesn't panic, then you're probably not in a good position to be shutting them in the float. I like to have them go in mentally as well as physically, because if they feel there is no escape and they hit the panic button, that's when things can go really wrong. So that's one thing. Closing your bum bar or your breeching door or whatever it is that you have behind your horse. If you don't have any of them, we'll tackle that in a moment. In we go. So let's assume that you don't have a bum bar or a tail chain or a breeching door. You just have a float and a tailgate. Park, super, super important. And we did the thing where we were swinging the breeching door, or the rump bar around, so the horse could hear the noise and see the movement. Same thing with your tailgate. If I do this, starting out with a little one and a bigger one, what I want to see is that my horse doesn't try and run out and panic. Okay. Now if she moves, I'm just going to ask her to stay in there until I can do this and she doesn't move. Now I'm staying right out of her way, and if she panicked and ran backwards, I would be out of the way. Don't ever stand behind the tailgate, because I know people that have had legs broken because they stood behind the tailgate. You need to give your horse an escape route, because when they're under pressure and they panic, they're going to go regardless of whether or not you're ready. And my son's laughing because she's just pooped again. Okay, so she's parked. She's parked while I've done things that perhaps could cause her to be stressed, and she's been okay. So now I'm going to ask her, if I'm not standing behind her, back, and I'm going to train. Good girl. And that's how you want them to come off. She could have been a touch straighter, but it was quiet, it was slow, and she still pointed at the float. She'd like to turn there because she might like to go back to her friends. But I'm actually going to reward her when she's pointing in towards the float and she's calm and she's standing at the tailgate. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now, the other thing is, if you walk into the float with your horse and that's how you get your horse on the float, that's not really a big problem. The problem is if your horse follows your feet, and when you come out of the float, the horse goes, oh, I think I need to go with you as well. That is why we like to train the horse's feet independent from our feet. It's really, really important when it comes to this part of float loading. So if I walk in the float, I can give her a pat. give her some food. And when I walk out, I want to know that she stays there. Now this isn't a super duper good floater. You can see she's turning her head round. She's not completely 100% relaxed about being in there, but she's a beast. She's safe. So I can go back up, I can walk forward, and my button, there we go, had to use my button, that I can reach with my whip, and I'm always going to rub that spot. If she goes to move, I can just give it a little tickle, 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 until she moves. I'm going to rub her with my whip. I'm going to make sure that she doesn't see the whip as being punishment or being something to fear. That's my plan. Sometimes when the horse runs backwards, you might have to go with your horse out the back of the float, tap, 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 till you get one step, and then you can start again. But because I know this horse will go on, she's just not as good at being able to move her feet independently, and she's not clearly as happy as I would like. You can see that park has actually got to be really solid. She's thinking about it, but her back feet haven't actually come off. So now I should be able to go, before I shut her in, so there she's creeping back, and I might just go forward, and I need those feet to go forward because I need to get in there, get the poo out. Now she's done 3 poos, which indicates that she's a little bit anxious about the whole arrangement. This horse doesn't go anywhere as a general rule, unless she has to go to the vet. So it's understandable that she's not completely comfortable with being on the float. But I put the training in so that I know, worst case scenario, something goes wrong, I can get her on the float, I can do it safely by myself, because for a lot of us, we are by ourselves. You need to know that you can be safe and that your horse can park for a period of time. Now I've asked a big ask of her, because I've just got her in out of the paddock, given her a brush, put her on the float with no warning, and actually she's barely been worked, well, she hasn't been worked in months because we're waiting for the saddle to come. So this is as raw as it gets, but I really want to show you how even horses that have had issues can be taught calmly to go on and off the float. Good girl. So the other thing that I do is I would use a feel on the lead rope with my BACK word, because I've already established that outside the float. The other thing I do, and this is totally a personal choice, but I can put a feel on the tail. I'm not pulling, I've just got a feel. Back, back. Now she doesn't understand that, so I'm not going to pull on her tail any heavier. But I can teach that by using the lead rope and that and the back. Back, release, and she stops. Back, and there I will. So there she didn't stop. Perfect example of what happens to a horse that isn't completely okay with coming back and stopping at any point. So I'm going to actually train this now. Back. Now I've got my whip sitting on her tail, so it's there if I need to use it. Back. Good girl. Good girl. Back. Good girl. And I'm rubbing. Good girl. Back. 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 Good. And hopefully you can see that when I give her a little touch with the whip, she actually knows that that means go forward. Back. 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 Good girl. Yeah, good girl. Back. Right, so I'm going to reward that because it's not absolutely 100% foot perfect, but she did stop, she waited several times before I actually asked her to come off. Now if I had a really high value food reward here, that's when I would give it to her. but otherwise I'm going to let her stand calmly, and you'll notice that I'm not holding on to her really tightly. Again, I want her to see standing near the float as something, you know, really relaxing and calming, and that I'm not going to push her to do something she's not ready for. Now, if you're working with a horse that you don't know very well, I would really recommend that you err on the side of caution, and if you see any of the stress indicators that the horse really isn't coping, or that they're giving you lots of running backwards or wanting to rear, then do some more work outside the float. Get your park really good. Get your forward aids really good. Install a forward aid somewhere that you can reach when you're in the float. I don't like going in the floats with horses unless I absolutely have to, and even then it would be only momentarily, to teach a horse where it needs to go and to maybe give it a little bit of confidence. Angle-eyed floats are a little bit different, and sometimes you have to get a little bit creative on how you can help the horse go in and be safe yourself. I'll often go up the other side of the divider, just because if the horse happens to panic and move, once the divider hits the wall, it can't come any further on you. So I would strongly recommend that you think really carefully about where you stand, how you manage it, what stage your horse is at, what needs to be better, and really do the work outside the float, because all the work outside the float is going to pay huge dividends. I've seen it time and time and time again where a horse that doesn't float is miraculously better once they've had a little bit of work outside the float. I had a horse yesterday, did that exact thing. So I can't recommend it highly enough. Do the work, do the work, do the work, because somebody who's more experienced may be able to get your horse on the float, but if you can't get your horse on the float under pressure, then it's not trained. Hope this has been helpful.